Good evening and welcome to. Are we hearing feedback? No, sort of. Well, I'll start the meeting and we can stop if we need to. Welcome to the. Sorry, I'm thrown off now. The March 27th, 2025 budget workshop for the Hartford Board of Education. We're grateful that you've taken time to watch our meeting this evening, and we look forward to hearing from the administration on the upcoming fiscal year 26 budget. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Torres Rodriguez.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We will dive right in. We will have an update on where we are relative to our 2026 budget process, share our progress on deficit mitigation. That is an ongoing process. Where we are relative to the engagement that has happened. And then we want to spend the majority of the time in a conversation about prioritization in order to get your feedback, your ideas, your thinking on how we should move forward, right? In the event that we don't receive additional funding to close the gap. So you'll also see references tonight on changes at school sites for your review as well after the meeting. And then we're going to make a specific ask, and that is to, as best as you can, if you can try not to reference specific school sites in questions tonight, given that we're still going through the proper processes relative to, right, in the Office of Talent Management. And so I know that conversations are happening. There's a lot of angst already, but we haven't released, if you will, any lists. So I just wanted all of us to be careful, for lack of a better word. And so let's move forward. And some of these first few slides we have seen, but I think it's always an important opportunity for us to just do the overview, especially for those that might be viewing with us. And so we've been talking about the structural deficit, ongoing deficit and challenges, which are driven by the flat revenue, the fact that costs continue to go up, especially around special education, tuition, transportation, and then our contractual obligations, right? We have to do right and pay our staff. And we've approached this process from two different angles. One is to prioritize the resources in our budget that are most in alignment with our strategic plan, and proposing reductions in other areas that, as much as possible, they don't directly compromise those. And a lot of work. Most of you, if not all of you, have been engaged with us in the legislative advocacy, both at the local city level and at the state level. And so we'll give you an update as to where we are relative to those and some next steps as well. Recap again on the $30 million deficit, right? We are projecting a deficit because, the money that's coming in is not enough for the money that has to go out. And so the key expenses, again, special education tuition, transportation, with a specific focus on that door-to-door transportation, and then salaries and our new contracts. And each of these categories, as we forecast out, are expected to increase by at least $9 million next year. And so we continue, our team, CFO Richard and her team, we're mining all of the information that is coming in. So while this continues to be an ongoing process, don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we were looking at a $30 million deficit. And if we look at the next slide, which, you got this update last time, we are already had identified mitigations for 13 million out of those 30. And we gave an update to you all at the board meeting. Also had another community forum. This one was a virtual forum. And the reductions, as you see here, include a combination of school-based and also district personnel, and also non-personnel reductions, as well as looking to do a reduction in special education door-to-door transportation. So that's where we've been. And then one more update, celebratory update, right, which was the $3 million that we learned that we will receive from the city one time. And so that helps, right? And so it gets that down um, to right from 16 to 13 to now. So now we have $14 million to go. In terms of the advocacy efforts, we've not yet received. I know there's a lot of conversations, lots of different things happening at the state level, so we haven't received any additional funding yet. And so the focus of the advocacy really now is narrowing in on that special education funding and right the ECS formula. We continue to monitor this on a daily basis, and we remain hopeful that we will get additional funding. And we'll talk about what the implications could be if we don't get additional funding, and where our thinking is relative to that. So a recap, big picture, through proposed reductions and additional funding that we got from the city, right? We now are a little more than halfway in mitigation, right? $16 million, leaving us with anywhere from 13 to 15 million. You know that you all are going to be voting on the budget on the 15th of April. And so our proposal is to put, for now, given that right there's still uncertainty, to put what we call a placeholder for those items in the budget that are unaccounted for and that equal to about 13 to 15 million dollars. Any new money that we receive from the state, right, will continue to go to closing the gap. And so this means that if we had to balance the budget, if you're taking a vote this evening, there are expenses that we cannot account for in the budget. So we want to have that conversation. We want to, hear your thinking as to, how should prioritization happen among what are already very important items and programs and services. So before we have that conversation, I'm going to tap in Chief CFO Richard to go through some more processes and some updates specifically relative to school engagement.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, we do want to focus a lot of the time on that discussion, but also wanted to provide you just an update on process and some of what schools have been engaging in as you have a chance later to look through some of that school-specific data and as we work towards that budget vote. So I'm just going to recap some of our process so far, who we've engaged, what we've learned. This is just a reminder of our timeline. We are nearing the end of it when we will do our public forum next week. We will share the draft budget with the final budget with the Board Finance Committee on the 7th, and then you all will be voting on the 15th. So we're nearing that, and this is our touch point to kind of cover this last piece of prioritization before we move into those stages. This is a slide we've seen, and I just want to name, we've really been focused on all 4 of these pieces throughout the process. So thinking about the strategic plan, obviously about financial sustainability. As you think today about some of the items to prioritize, definitely thinking through where is there a research base for it? What has community input been around this? And really with equity at the center of that. And I'll talk in a couple slides about how that has played out in the school budget specifically. So just a reminder, we like to show this slide, of course, because our resources are tied into our strategic plan, and this is the strategic plan you all voted on back in February. So really thinking through as we're making these decisions, and as we have the conversation tonight, what is most aligned to the work that we need to do over the next several years. So this slide is a new slide. It's meant to help explain how equity is really playing out in the equity-based starter budget and what was allocated to school sites. So what you can see here is there's kind of a starting place for all schools that is based on student enrollment. And so schools are receiving both positions through that equity-based starter budget, and they also receive dollars. So in terms of positions, there's a set of positions such as general education teachers that schools are allocated based on enrollment to meet the needs of all students. They also receive a set of dollars that's based on the number of students, and that covers things like substitutes, stipends, instructional supplies. There then is this layer of additional resources based on student need, which is where this equity piece comes in. So you'll see that schools receive additional positions from district teams that are based on student need. So special education teachers, bilingual teachers, et cetera, are going based on if that schools has more needs in that area, they get more allocations for that. I also want to name that the Title I funding that schools received this year, so that's a form of dollars that they get, is based on the number of economically disadvantaged students at the school. So that is allocated equitably across schools, again, based on the number of economically disadvantaged students. And there's also other grants schools have access to. A lot of those kind of have similar criteria. So the Perkins grant, for example, is for career tech education. It also gets allocated based on the number of economically disadvantaged students. So just wanted to name there's some differentiation here for equity and how schools get allocated resources. And then they make decisions around, okay, if I got these positions and these dollars, how do I meet the unique needs of my building? I just want to go over to some of process-wise who we've engaged, and I'll pause at the end of this section just to see if there's any questions on this. But this is just recapping some of the community engagement that we've done. So as the superintendent mentioned, we've had some community forums. A lot of you all were there. That's where we asked the community to solve the $30 million deficit by making a series of additions and cuts. We reviewed some of that feedback to get to that proposed reduction list that we talked through. And brought that back to community members as well to get another round of feedback. Also say we engaged student leaders, so they had the opportunity, and they shared out at the board meeting in March their experience with that, where they had to balance a budget and learn about the process. So this is something we'll continue to use. You'll see in the appendix for tonight a summary of that feedback as we have this conversation about continued prioritization. Also, as you all know, we've been doing a lot of legislative advocacy work. So there's been a task force. A lot of you all and we have testified at the state legislature. We've provided letters to community members, postcards that they can send, have worked directly with the city on increasing funding. And so that's really exciting to hear that there were an impact of that in the additional $3 million that we'll get. We've also been working with school districts across the state to enhance the power of that advocacy and to raise that a lot of these issues are collective issues. So thank you to everyone who's been a part of that, and it's continued work, right? We still don't know what we're getting from the state, and so this is an ongoing process of advocacy. I'm going to talk a bit now about, so that was community engagement, legislative engagement. I'm going to talk about school engagement now, where you can see some of the timeline here of the touch points we've had with school leaders. And this was some of specifically what was asked of schools. So it was to develop a budget that focuses on the needs of their school, but stays within the guidelines, to authentically engage their school communities through at least 2 school governance committee meetings, and also an opportunity to collaborate with other principals. And so we had meetings at the start of this process that were cohorts of principals who often shared certain characteristics. And so they had a chance to think through, issues that they were all facing, challenges, ideas they had for confronting that. We also offered optional office hours that were, say, well attended. Probably over half of the principals attended those, and also one-on-one meetings, especially in the case of following up on feedback to principals. So we had all central office teams took time to review independently. They then met with each other to align on their feedback and then met with principals to deliver a cohesive message. So that's just some of the process. I will say it's been difficult because these are difficult decisions and we had to make reductions. And so I don't want to minimize that, but I will say that there was a lot of opportunities to support principals through making those decisions and doing it in a way that is most aligned to the core needs of their school and is supportive of them. Some of what principals specifically were asked to complete, they did a needs assessment. So this was to assess their current year data and name what is this data telling me about what my biggest needs are for next year, so that when they received their positions and dollars, for next year, they were able to align it to those greatest needs. They got some historical information on enrollment projections on staffing, and also had an opportunity to see all the different grants that they have access to for next year. We also had a guidance doc that continued to evolve and included all the types of information they would need to make decisions around, what they need to budget for salaries, guidelines for certain grants, and then actually made a weekly budget update that was a rolling FAQ. So based on all of the questions we got, as we spoke to you all and had to communicate back to principals, putting all the information in one place. And again, central office was really collaborating around making sure we were continuously providing updates to principals. Because like I said, we know this is a difficult process. And so we were trying to be as supportive as we could in the context. I'm just going to pause there. Any questions on anything that we've talked through so far before I give a bit more information on what some of the changes at school sites look like, and then we'll get to our discussion. Okay. I'm going to continue on then to just a bit more detail about the changes at school sites. So you'll have more information, or you do in your appendix and in the school-specific information in the PDFs. As the superintendent mentioned, we're not going to get into all the details of that in the time that we have tonight. It's mostly so you can start looking through and preparing for the upcoming touch points that we have on this. And we'll get you even more detail as we move towards that 4-7 Board Finance Committee. But I did want to cover just a few key points related to some of the proposed reductions and how it played out in school site decision making. So we've showed this slide before, but I do think it's really important because as you look at some of the school specific changes, it has to do with a lot of different factors all at one time. So one piece, as we've talked about, is enrollment. So positions that they get allocated in the EBSB, dollars that they get allocated, a lot of that is dependent on student enrollment. I'll show you on the next slide what that looks like across the district. There's also the factors related to student need. And again, as I mentioned, Title I, that was new this year of allocating that directly to school sites. That was one of the changes that we made. And that is something allocated based on the needs of the students at the school. There's also school priorities. So we have schools who made one decision last year based on the needs of their building and have decided to do something different this year. So sometimes the changes are schools deciding to have a different type of position or not have a position and instead invest more in professional development for teachers. So you'll see some of that is the school decision making. And then of course we have this area of revenue availability. If we made changes to the EBSB formulas, and schools also, there's a lot of different grants schools have access to. And so those are on varying timelines. For example, we don't, outside of the magnet operating grant, we don't have clarity on any other magnet grants the state will be offering next year. So we were not able to say decisively what schools had to plan around that. We did have updates on our comprehensive school improvement, CSI schools, and what they would have access to. So some of it is some of those school-specific grants as well. And then I do want to be clear, and this will come up on the following slides as well. We've talked about this, but that one-time state funding for this year, the $5 million, that's not included in any of this. And so that is a loss that schools will experience if they had restored positions, because that's not in the budget for next year because it was one-time funding. This just gives a summary of enrollment changes across the district, where you can see a slight decline from projected last year to projected this year, and kind of our methodology for doing it. What you'll see in the school site specific PDFs are how that plays out at each school site by grade level. So that will give you more information about how this is impacting specific schools and their allocations. But this is just a snapshot of, as a district at a whole, where we were seeing some of that enrollment change. This piece is about what we've been talking about in that 34-ish general education teacher positions that were allocated. That's one of those reduction items. It's about $3.4 million. And what you can see here is that some of that enrollment decline would have led to, if we didn't change anything about the EBSB formula, just with the enrollment decline, that would have led to about 12 fewer positions. With the changes we made, that led to 34. So about 12 positions are due to enrollment, 22 are driven by the changes to the formulas. So you'll see that's about 34, again, allocated positions. Schools then make decisions with what they want to do with those allocations, if they want to buy additional allocations with their funding. And I will name the restored positions were about 54 positions at school sites. So even more than what was reduced through the formula was actually those one-time positions. That was about $5 million. So schools may experience both of those losses, the one-time funding from this year and some of the changes that were made to the formula. What you can then see here, we showed this at the board meeting. This is a slightly different example. And I also built out one for elementary just to give you a sense of, okay, what might this mean for a school site? And what you'll see in the appendix as well is actually a step-by-step every decision a school went through so that you can see all the different levels of what they're considering as they're making those staffing and non-salary determinations. But what you'll see is at the high school level, again, what we changed was instead we kept the ratio the same, 1 teacher for 21 students, but we moved from rounding up to rounding. And so that sometimes, depending on the number of students, resulted in 1 fewer teacher for that grade level, and a change in class size of 1 to 2 students. So that was the change to the formula at the high school level that we've been discussing as one of those proposed reductions. The change at the elementary level, I thought I'd build out this example just because it's slightly more complicated because elementary has different ratios for different grade levels. And one of the changes that we made was previously, so in the current year, schools got kind of a lump sum of allocations to then decide which are grade level and which are specials, elective, unified art teachers. This year, they got specific teachers for grade levels and then specific teachers for specials or electives. And so there were some reductions in some cases. For example, in this case, there was a 0.5 reduction of a teacher. But one of those changes was to actually say, here are the number you need for each grade level based on number of students. And then here is the number for unified arts to make sure all students have access to that and that teachers are able to get their contractual planning time. And finally, I'll do one more example. We'll pause for some questions and then we will move into the discussion. This example here is showing what we mean when we say we didn't allocate certain non-certified positions and we did allocate Title I funding. So there's a lot going on here, but I do want to talk it through because I think it will help make more concrete what that change was. So in the current year, so FY25, schools were allocated various positions. There were student engagement specialists that went for schools that had high chronic absenteeism rates. Family and community support service providers were 1 per school. Behavior techs were at middle schools. And office assistants, schools only received 1 when they had more than 500 students. And executive assistants, every school got 1. So that's a lot of non-certified positions. But what the change was that, oops, my bad. Schools, instead of having an allocation for a student engagement specialist, FCSSP, or behavior tech, schools received their Title I dollars to choose what they wanted. And again, you'll be able to see that in some of the school-specific data and in some of the summary data, just what are some of those choices that schools made. We also made sure every school had an office assistant, so that actually was an increase from the previous formula, and every school continued to have the executive assistant. So to play that out in an example, last year a school might have received 2 SCSs, an FCSSP, and no office assistant. And then the same elementary school this year might receive an office assistant, and then they have a bucket of dollars, and they choose to fund 1 SES and a 0.5 SCSSP. So this is just to highlight kind of some of that school decision-making component. Again, you'll see a more detailed example in the appendix, and you can see how it played out at each school site. But essentially, instead of allocating positions directly, we gave schools more funding to decide which positions, if any, that they wanted to fund alongside their other non-salary items. I'm going to pause there because we're now going to get into the discussion around prioritization in the event we don't get additional state funding. But I did want to make sure we shared kind of where we've been so far and how some of that is playing out in the school site data that you'll see. So any questions on that?
Brody?
Can clarification be given on the FSSSP thing?
Yes, and let me add, all schools were required to have a 0.5 FCSSP. And this is essentially just saying, instead of allocating that, allocating an FCSSP in the formula, schools were able to change an allocation or fund it with some of their Title I funding. And it's very aligned to Title I. There's a huge family engagement piece of that. So yeah, I should have added that. There's still the board guardrail of schools need to have a 0.5 FCSSP. There was just a different mechanism by which they were funding it.
Follow-up, Chair, Madam Chair.
Sorry, yes, please.
So each school will have a 0.5 FSSSP.
Yes, and they, in the event that they felt as though someone else in that building was fulfilling the duties of family engagement, that was a conversation that they were having with their EDSL.
Yeah, that wasn't my understanding from the session you guys had with the board. My understanding was each school was going to have a 0.5 SSSP, not that they were going to have the funding and they could decide what they're going to do. No, that they were going to have that position. That's what I left that meeting understanding.
Got it. Okay, I think that was just a miss. Yeah, that was just a miss then in that conversation, and I know.
That was a big miss.
Well, because I think, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
Can
and
I
I
jump-
I hear you, because I think part of what we heard was just, we had talked through, okay, we're not going to allocate these non-certified positions. We're going to give schools more funding, but we are still going to require them to use funding for a 0.5 FCSSP. But I don't know if Paul, Leslie, you want to jump in, because that might have just been a misunderstanding on our part of that piece.
Well, what I was going to say is I think we understood that the expectation from the board was that every school would have a 0.5 FCSSP. I think what we're talking about is the mechanism by which we achieved that. And so we didn't increase a school's allocation by a 0.5 FCSSP because that would have simply added to the deficit, right? But we had provided schools with a significant number of dollars in Title I and flexibility with those dollars. But part of that conversation we had at the board retreat was, are there guardrails and minimums that schools have to achieve with those dollars? And so the FCSSP was one of those minimum guardrails that we included. So I think what we're talking about is the mechanism by which we achieved that requirement, because we couldn't, after the board retreat, if we had gone back and just given a 0.5 FCSSP as an additional allocation to every school, again, we would have been increasing the deficit by that dollar amount, but schools had the money in their discretionary. And so really the question we were asking you at the board retreat was, are there minimum requirements you want us to put on those discretionary dollars?
I want to clarify that, yes, that the expectation, just to make it overly explicit, the expectation is at least a 0.5 across all schools. How they get there is, I think, what we're trying to clarify here, that we weren't saying we were going to allocate that. Ms. Brody, does that answer your question?
No, it is. I'm not clear. So Title I, when I hear Title I, I think of there's always a component that has to do with parents involved in their children's education, being involved. Like that is a priority, has always been a priority under Title I. So if we are not as a district, because, someone in the building can kind of fit that role, I'm thinking of who in the building is going to be that. Like, I don't understand how that's not a priority, because we're not saying, a social worker, we're going to see who else can do that kind of work. We're not saying about any other position. So I don't understand. Maybe other people don't understand. I understand what that position entails. I understand. And then 0.5, that's not even one person. You're getting half a day of someone maybe. I understand how important it is in our schools. And it's been a fight for it for the over 15 years that I've been involved in Hartford Public Schools as a board member or as an active parent. That role has always been very important to families, very important to PTO involvement, that person, very important to making sure, participating in recruiting parents for SGCs. The main things that we don't have that is related to parental involvement, this position is for that. I couldn't even tell you, just as a parent, what my FSSSP has done for me, this having a freshman in high school. it is a pivotal role in our school system, and parents have fought for this for so many years. And now to think that it's an option, if what I'm hearing is very disappointing,
So I will
in
clarify.
some sense unacceptable to me. I'm
Yeah,
good.
so it's not, we did make it clear to schools that the expectation is to have at least a 0.5 FCSSP. What we're just talking about is how that gets funded. And so previously, actually, the district was allocating it using Title I funds in a lot of ways, because to your point, it's really connected to Title I funds. What we're saying is we just gave the Title I funds to schools, but said, you are expected to have a 0.5 FCSSP. The board named that, this is important. So I just want to clarify, that is the expectation. It's just a slightly different way of approaching the funding for it.
Clarifying question. Expecting and mandating are two different things.
So, yes, so I think what we're saying is every school has to have a 0.5.
They will have,
FCSSP.
yes.
Yes, we
Thank
are
you.
mandating that every school has a 0.5
Yes.
FCSSP. Based on the board retreat conversation we had.
And can I also just say that we agree as to how crucial this role is, and that we finally, I think, got it to a place where there's more of a universal approach to keeping it focused on supporting families, students, and the partnerships with our community. So I don't want it to get lost that we prioritize. I think the challenge that we're facing here is the resource gap that we have.
Ms. Darcel Ledger?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure, is Miss Board Member Brody, are you all set? I just want to make sure that she's all set. Is she there?
Yes, I'm all set.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so my question is, and good evening, everyone. My question is with regards to the number of teachers you have, or number of paraprofessionals, non-certified staff that you have in the building. What if a student comes in, or a student ends up who's already there, and you've already allocated all of your funds, or the school has already allocated all of their funds? Say a child needs, in their IEP, it states that they need a 1-to-1. They need a person that's with them at all times. Now, where will that funding, it's a two-part question. The first part is, where will that funding come from should that child, that student need an additional, that building need an additional staff person that's assigned to that individual? The second part of the question is, what if a student comes from, say, another school, and they come with needing a staff person, with them, a 1-on-1? Would that money follow, this in the same district, would that money follow that staff person to the new school? And I guess three-part, what if a child came from a different, another district, as opposed to another school that's within the district? If you can please clarify and answer those questions.
Yeah, and I'll take a stab, and then Deputy Foster, if you want to lean in. Yes, so the funding would follow. And so the special education team is always assessing throughout the year where are the needs of students. And actually something that you'll see is, as a result of that, you'll see that the para educators are kind of allocated at the district level, because they're looking across all the schools and saying, to your point, if a student were to move from this school to this school, that adult support para, or whatever the case may be in that student's IEP, needs to follow to that other school. So we track it in a slightly different way, because we know there is movement. And there is consideration in the budget for the fact that we don't know all of the needs of students right now. That's something the special education team, attempts to assess and build in, because they know we might get a student from outside the district who then needs a para. We also have students who, based on their IEP, no longer need a para, or that, they've moved to a situation where actually they've progressed and they don't need that anymore. And so they are constantly, I think almost every day, looking at what the para needs are. So the funding, yes, does follow the students. And if there is a new student, they would get access to that resource. But like I mentioned, they're also assessing in the cases where perhaps a para is no longer needed in a particular situation. And they anticipate that and budget for that when they look at the school year of kind of the total number that might be needed, knowing there might be some movement.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Tatum?
Thank you. I noticed looking at the reductions that we have already identified in the budget, I noticed that some of those estimated savings have changed from the previous meetings. I wonder if you want to highlight any explanations as to like how those numbers were updated, because the savings was 15 million before, now it's 13 million. I noticed some have increased their projected savings, some have decreased their projected savings. Is there
Yes.
anything that you'd like to speak to on that?
Yes. Thanks for bringing that up too. We should have said it when we talked about the slide. So one piece was actually in the reduction target. If you look at the previous estimates, this was larger, and that's because it actually included a potential reduction around the special education paras in what it actually relates to exactly what we just talked through. However, based on the needs that the special education team is assessing, there's just too many needs of students to set a reduction target around that. So we did not feel like that would be a responsible decision. We do think that there's some reductions that can be achieved in the door-to-door transportation per the conversations we've had. So you see a decrease from 5 million to 2 million now in that area. And then you see an increase on the central office position area. So we were planning on 15 central office positions. We're now planning on 20. So that was an increase in that area. And I think those were the biggest shifts. So thanks for calling that out.
And thank you for explaining. Thanks.
Mr. Walker?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would open kind of seconding the comment that Board Member Brody made, that I too had the understanding that half of FCSSP was going to be in the equity budget to, in essence, allow the principal to only spend half a head count to get a full head count. I realize that's not the reality. It gives me a little more concern though, because the principal's gonna have a little bit more of an unfunded mandate, because they're really gonna have to have a full FCSSP. I mean, they can buy a half, but that's, for the value they play, it's gonna be tough to work with a half. So, the question I want to ask, just to levels of my thinking, is notionally, like, what's going to be the full budget that principal is going to get to be able to get an SES, FCSSP, and BT. The other question I had was around the kindergarten and that K-5. The classroom student teacher ratio increase is significant, and it feels like it's going to impact learning. I realize it is within the state statutes, but to me, that feels like a significant impact, and I don't know what administrators or teachers have said about that. It's well above that 1 or 2 headcount differences, right? So I kind of want to know what the feedback you've gotten is about that. The other question I want to ask in that same way is, at the high school level, that 21 student average plus or minus 1 type of thing looks pretty reasonable. I want to know though, on the ground, like, what's the classroom reality? Like, my sense is at high schools, there are teachers that already have like 25 students in a class or 26 students in a class. And the difference between going from 26 to 27 is different than going from 21 to 22. And so I don't know those numbers, but did you guys look at the percentage of, let's say, teachers with 21 students on average versus teachers that have already 24, 25 students in their class currently? That's something I wouldn't mind seeing or understanding.
Yeah, and let me answer the elementary question first, because I do think this piece, what's really happening here, because what you can see at this school is that it was only a reduction of 0.5 total teacher. And so actually when the original equity-based starter budget was built in FY25, essentially what it was taking was the class size, the contractual maximum, so that 23 for K to 2 or the 27 for 3 to 5, and then adding in a factor to account for specials and elective teachers. So that's what brought it down so low, because what it was saying was with what you get in this formula, just those top two numbers, 18.4 students and 21.6 at those grade levels, that's your total number of teachers. And then you can figure out what goes as homeroom and what goes as specials. What we're now saying is we're actually just going to kind of break out that formula and just start with the contractual max for the homerooms. And then for the specials, it just separates that out to say this is the number of specials or elective teachers. And so there is a slight reduction, right? That is where some of the savings comes from. But actually overall, it's not like class sizes are going from 18.4 to 23. It's actually the case that in this case, it's very similar. It's actually in this school, the class sizes would be the same size just because it's a small reduction, but it might be increasing by one student. But yeah, I think it's just how the formula worked previously. Those other allocations were built into the formulas up top.
So if I can give quick feedback that in terms of presenting this, I think what would be helpful to me is another column that says kind of what's the reality on the ground at that school level, right? That's all. Because I get what you're saying, that this is almost like funny money because it's a formula versus actual classroom sizes. What will be good to see is what's the actual classroom size? Because yes, I do understand your point that if you include specials, it makes classrooms look artificially small, and that's not real. So that would be
Yes.
helpful. Now, what
Okay.
about at the high school? Is a similar scenario at the high school, or what's the story there?
Yeah, so there's also some reductions overall at the high school level. I will say what we've seen is that there's a wide variety of class sizes at the high school level. So you will have some that maybe are larger than 21, but there's also some that are smaller. And so a lot of the work at the high school level, or what the conversations we've been having with principals, is about scheduling. And so it's understanding all the course requests from students and what it means to create an efficient schedule that leverages staff really effectively so that the average class size can still be 21 students. So in a lot of cases with the rounding up, that was enabling the average class size to be slightly below that. Now I would say the class sizes, because we're allocating at 21 students per teacher, are going to be at 21 students per teacher. But we're also working on that variety because there's a wide range of class sizes at the high school level from what we saw in the data. But I'm also happy to your feedback, add kind of what does this feel like at the ground to both of these slides for when we share it again.
Chair, if I could have a quick follow-up. Just as a request, Caitlin, at the high school level, can we revisit this post the start of the year? All right, let's revisit and look at what course offerings are for students, because the impact of what you're saying, now I do agree with you. There are classes in the high school where you only have 14 students. And what I'd like to see is how much do they impact it? Because the risk, it sounds like, is some classes may be lost because that course can't maintain more than, let's say, 13 or 14 students. It may be a very important class to a segment of the population. And I kind of want to see, how many losses that we have in that area and what student feedback is in terms of their feelings about classes they lose. Because my sense is they're not going to have a lot of voice in the actual final schedule of their options. But I would like to see what their feelings are post that time. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I totally do. And I think that as we move through, schools are kind of moving to that scheduling process now. They had to think about it a bit to make these decisions.
Yes.
But I think what I'm hearing is we can come back to you with, as schools are scheduling in this context, what is coming up in terms of courses available to students. And yeah, to your point, how do students feel about it? I think that'd be a great topic actually for the student leadership committee. It's all high school students to kind of see what their experience is. So yeah, we can come back with that.
And the reason I'm just saying that finally is, a lot of times I think we roll stuff out and I don't get the sense that we do a lot of quick feedback learning, get it back to us so we can really see, even if we can't fix it immediately, it may inform our thinking of how we want to move forward and maybe improve it for the following year.
Yes, totally agree.
Okay, thank you.
Estrada Perez.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, two questions. So one is following up sort of the conversation we were having about the FCSSPs. I just want to understand, I understand that there's like a difference in the way that we're funding it, right? So I want to make sure that I understand that process. So when you're saying you're releasing the Title I schools, essentially the Title I to the schools, to the individual schools, with the expectation that there is this role, at least a part-time position, is before you were making those determinations in central office, and now the schools can do it, but there's an expectation that this role will be filled. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I would say even previously schools could still make a decision around that allocation and decide, to have it be a 0.5 or a whole one. But yes, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay, but they are expected to have a disposition at least at half a time
Correct.
each school.
Correct.
Okay. Because I agree that, and I think I've echoed what everybody shares here, the importance of this, especially if we're talking about students missing school, having to have those connections with the school, like as a third space, as a third space, and the ways that we connect with families. I think those are really, really, really important roles. And what a shame that the budget is in such a way, because state legislature and all of that work, that we're having to make these necessary cuts, because it's not fair to the families. And to Board Member Brody's point, families fought really hard for this, right? Because of the necessity of it. The other question that I have, which is a little different for this, that piqued my interest in terms of that conversation around dollars, is we talked a little bit about, and I'm sorry I was a little bit late, running from another meeting, so I didn't catch the beginning, but we talked a little bit about grants that are available for magnet schools and how there might be some opportunities. What would be interesting for me to know, and I think for the board, for our own edification process and education of how this all this process works, is because it also came up at the last board, which was how many grants are available for magnet schools, how many are available for neighborhood schools, what kind of grants and what kind of funding are we talking about? Are we talking about the 50,000, 100,000, right? Like, it would be good to know what is actually on the table and for who in the future, because I think that'll help us speak through the budget a little, with more information.
Yeah, no, agree. And let me give you a quick overview just because I know some of that, so you have a sense. So there was the Title I, those are federal grant dollars that again, schools got based on their economically disadvantaged students. The rate is $1,000 per pupil for economically disadvantaged pupils. So that is the biggest source of kind of grant funding that a school has. Another grant that we were aware of is the state allocated $200,000 to every comprehensive school improvement, or CSI school. So those are the schools that are kind of rating the lowest on the state performance metrics. And so they receive $200,000 each to help work towards improving their outcomes. So that it's about 13 schools, I believe, are on that list. And so they all received an additional $200,000. We then receive Perkins grant money, and so that is federal grant money for career tech education. So that goes to our secondary schools, and that also goes based on economically disadvantaged status. And then North Hartford Ascends has a specific grant that funds certain positions and non-position items within that set of schools in North Hartford. And those are the main ones, I would say. And again, I can make a slide with this and I just wanted to touch on it because you asked. And then on the magnet front, outside of the magnet operating grant, which really is just the state funding we get for suburban students because we don't get ECS funding, that flows into the positions that schools get. But we don't have knowledge right now from the state on any other magnet grants that exist. Previously, those have been things like magnet extracurricular grants or things like that that offered kind of more programming and opportunities at magnet schools. So I'd say those are the main ones that a school would have seen in their template right now. And we continue to monitor to see, what else comes up and what they could plan for. But I'll make sure to write all of that down.
Chair, if I can follow up. Yeah, I think this was, I think that would be really great to know, because I think it'll help us understand deeper level of like, what's funding coming from the federal government, what's funding that's coming from state agencies, how does that money get distributed? And we might have an idea of it already in their disparate spaces, but I think it'll be good to have it in one place that we can reference, so that we know, if we really understand where the monies come from, and then where it gets out. It helps inform the other aspects of it. So I appreciate that. And very curious. So thank you for the overview.
CFO Richard,
And
if I may.
especially, go ahead.
I think in a prior year, we've captured and codified that information. So it might just be going back, looking at it and updating with the amount. But we've done it before, and I think we've actually probably included it in the budget book in the past.
Yeah, we can do that this year too. And when we do the overview at the finance committee on the 7th, we could absolutely do that.
Thank
Okay, I do want to make sure we get to the discussion. I did want to have this discussion, and thank you all for your questions and the seeking to understand all of this, because I know, it's been hard making reductions with school sites, and we're trying to balance supporting them through this, being clear about all the information with knowing we have to work towards the deficit mitigation. So just appreciate you all in working through this with us. I do want, just in the interest of time, to move towards the conversation we want to have around prioritization. And so I'll turn it over to the superintendent to speak to the next slide.
Yeah, and I guess I'll preface by acknowledging that, right, these are really difficult times, conversations, decision points. Right, we've been in this state of mitigation and cuts before. This is beyond that. I want to name that, and these cuts, right? They're not just numbers on a page, on a slide deck. Like, they impact people, right? They mean increased workloads. They mean reduced resources. These numbers mean, in some cases, loss of valued colleagues. So I want to lead this conversation with that acknowledgement, that we're sharing this as the other things that we are not saying that we suggest at all doing without. And in the context of not having any additional funding, these are things that we would be forced with putting on the table for decisions. So, and right, we know that we're still having the $13 to $15 million gap to close. So in no order, and just because we actually aligned the program with the strategic alignment, you see here, Hope Academy, which is, right, our tier 3 support for students at the high school level, student success centers, which is tier 2 support structure for students at our neighborhood high schools, our full service community schools. The funding for the lead agencies, I don't have to speak to what the detrimental impact that will have across our schools, and also extending to our families and community, our health clinics, middle school athletics. Again, none of these is something that we are recommending. And when we have to identify how we would close a gap and keep the current programming, none of this is extra, none of it. Nor do I believe that what's on this list is enough for what we need. Middle school programs, some of you that have been here for several years know how hard we worked. This was one of the things that our families said when we engaged community before consolidating and reimagining and redefining. It's one of the things our families said. It's a basic opportunity for students, and not only supports, right, their academic, but their development as whole young people. Ready CT and CT Rise, those are all in alignment with college career readiness. Additional positions at central office, right? We said that we already identified positions at central office. These would be extra. Let's see, our coaches are on the list. AP positions for specifically schools that have 250 students or less, and buildings and grounds. From a pure technical exercise perspective, you see here that these equal to $13 million. But I want to just make sure that while I know I have a responsibility to present a balanced budget, and we have still unanswered, not unanswered, right? We don't know if and when additional funding will be declared. We had to push ourselves to identify what would be on a list. So we are going to ask for your thinking relative to prioritization. That's the ask. Whether or not that is a conversation that you all feel that we should engage in, I defer to you. I'll pause there.
Mr. Tatum?
Yeah, it's certainly a heavy list to look at. And rather than dive into answering the question, I think I was looking for a way to get out of having to answer the question. So I went back to the state statutes related to boards of education's responsibility to like provide a budget and just the process by which they do that. And it, the statutes say that the administration prepares a estimate of the expenses that it would take to run their school system, that then the board passes on to, in Hartford's case, City Council for their review. And they can kick it back to us with some recommendations, and we can either accept or reject those recommendations. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we sort of like throw this ball into City Council's court necessarily. But it does make me wonder about what the possibilities are for how we navigate this ultimately what is a political like process in the sense of we're putting our hopes in the state legislature for creating some policy change that will mean that we don't need to make these cuts. So that like we're not talking about sort of like educational expertise here necessarily. Like hopefully it doesn't come to that, to make some kind of tough decisions that we would want educators to make rather than politicians. But I don't know, I'm trailing off a bit, but I guess I just hesitate to give any air of legitimacy to the idea that like, yeah, we could prioritize and we could make do, and here, City Council, we balanced our budget, we did great work, like so then it's like, oh, is there a problem? I'm not sure anymore because they balanced their budget. Like what would it look like to pass an actual, what the statute says is an estimate of what it would cost to run our school system to City Council, and where would they take it from there? So I guess I'm zooming out a little bit and asking a process question, like what could the process look like from here for us in the coming month?
What provisions are you referring to, Stephen? I'm just curious. I'd like to take a look at that too, because I think that is,
Yeah, I can drop it in the chat. I was just looking at it.
Thank you.
It's section 10-222. I'll put a link in the chat.
I appreciate you, Mr. Tatum, lifting this, because each and every one of the things on this list, right, is at the center of our operation. Like there's nothing on this list that I would suggest because of where we are, whether you're looking at coaches, right? We know that we're only in year one and we have 150 some odd vacancies, which means that we're going to have a lot of new staff next year that we have to support. I could stand here, justify all of it. each and every one of those.
I mean, can I jump in?
Yeah, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I mean, to the question of where do we go? I mean, I think part of why we brought you the budget tonight, the way we brought it to you was we did a lot of due diligence to find the 13 million we already found. And I don't think any of us on the staff are saying that we even like that 13 million worth of reductions. And I think because frankly, we don't think we're gonna know what the state is gonna do prior to the April 15th when we have to vote a budget. And so I think that's why we brought this forward as essentially an unbalanced budget that we're bringing you and saying, if we were to vote, for example, an unbalanced budget on April 15th with a placeholder, saying we are waiting to hear on state funding for this addition to cover this gap. And then, presumably would have to come back to you subsequently. If no state money was forthcoming to revisit these items. But I think it's to your point, like, we could have, based on this list, we could have come to you tonight and said we reduced 26 million, but we would have been saying that we had cut these things. And I think we weren't ready to say that.
Could I just add a quick follow-up comment? I think I appreciate this list in one way, which is that it shows what the stakes are, right? Like it concretizes what I think for some people is this sort of like, oh, what are we throwing all this money for at the school system, right? This really shows it, and from an advocacy perspective, right? Like this is a powerful list because it makes it clear what is at stake. So that in that way, the information is valuable and useful in terms of advocacy. And yeah, I don't know, I've never really been through a budget process before. So the idea of like a placeholder in a budget is new to me, but I'm curious to learn about these tools that exist to try to do the right thing. And hopefully have things work out with a lot of work and effort to make it that way.
And to Stephen's point, and thank you for all of that information, Stephen. This is really interesting. Really great way to think about it. So I really do appreciate that. And then Paul, can we continue that conversation on the 7th when we meet as the finance committee on any things that we come up with between now and then as well? Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I certainly embrace what Board Member Tatum is saying, that that all of these are valuable to the district. None of these are expendable. I do want to talk about priorities because I do think budgets represent our values, and so I wanted to talk about if we eliminate some of these, where I can imagine us going to fulfill the mission of a particular line item. My first comment, though, is I know success centers are within the local high school. Are Hope Academies also within the local high school? I think they are, correct?
They are now. We could no
What's that?
longer, after they are now, Mr. Walker, we could no longer afford to have them in a separate location, and so we brought them into the high school.
Which is fine.
Yes.
And so my feeling is, if they're within the high school settings, I would keep both of those. That they directly impact students that are our end users, and so if I'm prioritizing, those stay. My view is I want to move things that I believe the city could help us support, and so that full service community lead agency funding, while we need it, that community interface and enrichment programs, I'm believing if I had to ask the city for any help, it would be in funding that type of program where there's a real community connection there, and there can be some justifications using city funds to fund those agencies to do community-based work. But they'll be doing it through our schools, obviously. The same thing with health clinics. We certainly need them, but I would believe again that between city and state funding, that would be where I would, if I had to ask for help in an area, it would be in that area of health clinics. Could we find grants or funding from state or federal or even local to help in that area? Middle school athletic programming. I know we expanded athletic programming, but the city is now funding this sports and rec department. And so again, I kind of want to believe in that one area. They potentially could help us find resources to help with coaching or maybe some funding to help fund folks who would do this additional work on behalf of our school children. Ready CT and RISE, I've heard a principal say that's really invaluable to him. So I would definitely keep that. I think it helps students within the school setting. And so I would not get rid of that program at all. Coaching positions. Now, I'm assuming we're talking about those coaches that work with teachers. We kind of decimated that a little bit in our cuts last year. So I understand they're valuable, but here's my mindset on that particular area. I would look to see if there's a way we can take those types of coaching positions and move them from central office and embed them into schools in some kind of way. If we can't keep coaches, if we can find a way to train up senior or lead teachers to perform some of those duties and somehow give funding to principals to somehow work with us to, because that's their value to me. If they're embedded in schools, schools can find a way to keep them. It feels to me that role got really cut in ways that didn't meet the needs of schools. So that's the only thing I would say there. If there's a way we could move that to schools and save that money in some creative way and still get the coaching function perform for teachers, I'd be okay with that. Obviously, central office positions, painful, but yeah. AP positions, painful, but I could be okay with that. Painful, but I could see that still being doable. And I'm not sure with building and grounds how much we can move on that. I know we're already kind of tight with the custodial staff, so I'm not sure how much more trimming we can do on the facilities end. I don't have a lot of purview there, but just felt like, you get what I'm saying? Schools seem to feel losing their custodial assistants. And so I have some concerns about how much we can cut into that facility staff like that. That would be my priorities going through that list.
Thanks, Mr. Walker. Ms. Fortune?
Thank you. Sorry, this is a lot to take in, and I'll sort of start with a personal anecdote. My 8-year-old is in 2nd grade at Noah Webster, and he came home. He loves history, and he's been learning a lot about segregation and wit and wisdom. And he came and says, you know, he did this little report about a family, I believe, like in Texas near the U.S.-Mexico border, the schools that the children of Mexican descent were attending were just, he says, you know, it was essentially like a dilapidated, you know, shack, and they had to eat lunch outside with flies on their food, whereas the schools that the white children went to were really so beautiful. They had great cafeterias, great facilities, gyms, etc. And then he says, you know, it's a great thing that segregation ended. And, you know, I listened to him, then I pondered and I said, you know, well, segregation in a way ended, but not entirely. Right? Like what we have now is quite a bit of economic segregation. I explained to him, I said, you know, for instance, you're at Noah Webster, you had a really good school, you have a lot of facilities, you have support, you have teachers, parent involvement. Not every Hartford kid gets this experience. Not every kid who goes to school has a teacher there in the US or the facilities that they need. And I said, and even though you had a really good school, there are kids who have even more resources than you have. And he's thinking, like, what type of resources? I say, like nicer libraries, nicer gym, bigger playgrounds, all these extra things that you don't have even at your pretty good school. And his takeaway from this conversation was, oh my goodness, my school's really crappy. And he went and said that to a friend, which then, sort of terrified me. And I had a conversation with him again. And he says, well, if I don't have all of the great things that these other schools have, then I'm not at a really good school, right? At 8, that was his takeaway, despite my effort to share this more nuanced information with him. And I say all of that to say that being on the board, I think it's like watching the sausage be made. In a way, it's nice to be able to be a part of the process, but it's also very disheartening. And I don't know how much people who are not engaged in this process, I'll rephrase that. I believe wholeheartedly, like, people who are not involved in this process don't fully appreciate how difficult this is and how hard it is. So I really want to sort of lift what Stephen Tatum said. I think, right, so I did pull up section 10-222 about appropriations and budget. Maybe another way too is side by side is we prepare the budget that we think we need to actually really an itemized estimate to maintain schools and operate schools, so that people can see this is what is needed to just have a really, decently functioning school. And then these are the cuts that we're forced to make because we're not getting these monies. And if you really feel like we're being careless and we're not good stewards of these funds, you tell us what cuts you think we can make that would not impact student learning, not impact teacher morale, not impact all of the things that we keep telling we want schools to do. You tell us what your great ideas are, right? Because I don't think people are really appreciating this. And it's frustrating because we to go back to what Tyrone you said, we get this unfunded mandate, right? We have to educate at a level where students are graduating, being able to understandably be able to read and have a basic kind of education when they're graduating. But we don't have the funds to do that for every student, right? Many will do it, but it's really difficult to answer the needs of every student when we're in such a high need area. And I don't think people appreciate that. So we get, instead of people banding together and trying to advocate for what we need, we end up with this sort of divide and conquer approach where people are then pitted against each other, right? We're trying to do our best, but then we get the community criticizing us for trying to consolidate school or cutting the teacher in their school or cutting the role that, Shantae said is really needed. So it ends up being, because everyone's thinking so narrowly for their, their child, their community, their school, that the bigger picture is lost and we all suffer in the process, right? Less educated children means future workforce that is less capable of rising to the occasion, and then you put that at the national level, we have a less competitive country. And we get signal text messages about these incompetent people doing things and not doing it well. Like, that's all in some ways related. And it's very disheartening. And yeah, I am all for an approach that puts this in people's faces, let them know this is what we need to run schools well in Hartford. This is what we get. Therefore, we have to make cuts. These are the cuts that we've come up with. So I'll stop there. It's really, and I mean, personally for me, I have 3 young kids. My youngest is going to start pre-K 3. She literally has her entire educational journey ahead of her. I was texting with a friend who graduated law school together, and she told me, yeah, we just bought land in Glastonbury. We're going to build in Glastonbury. Really want a good school district. Friends told me, Vernon is just not great, and we're really chasing the great school district. I thought about it. Then I replied to her, say, yeah, I live in Hartford. My kids are in Hartford Public Schools. I guess I'm taking a labor-intensive approach because I'm on the board and I'm trying to do something, right? I don't want to judge her decisions. Like, it's her right. And she says, yeah, that's the only way change happens. But I'm also thinking, do I want to run this social experiment with my own children's future, right? I have the means to put them in better schools, live in a different town. Most of these parents don't. So that's even like personally, I struggle with it. Will I keep my kids in Hartford public schools when they can't go to Noah Webster if they don't end up at, say, Renzulli or something like that? Like it's just a really crappy way to feel. Anyhow, that's my spiel.
Thanks, Ms. Fortune. I would like, Ms. Strata Perez, I'll get to you really quick. I would like to say, too, that I do think that, I mean, this process is absolutely awful. I've appreciated everything that the administration has done. I know that this is absolutely painful and very frustrating. I also want to lift that there are a lot of opportunities in Hartford schools. I know that it gets a bad rap. I know that the word on the street is that they're not great schools, but I've seen these kids in these schools, and the ones that want to do things, the opportunities are absolutely endless. And I don't want that to get lost in the conversation either. So I just wanted to be sure that that was out there. Mrs. Strata Perez?
Sorry, can I just respond to that?
Sure.
So yes, I think it is true. The kids who want to do something, like myself, I came here, my parents did not speak English, I was undocumented, I managed to finish school. I was salutatorian of my school, so I got some scholarship. I went through college, waitress during the night, put myself through college, graduated, and lucked out that I just got a working permit right when I graduated. And then lucked out that I fell in love with an American citizen. Now I'm a US citizen, right? Like, but we don't have the structure in place to really have every kid succeed. And that's the point we need to convey. We always will have people who are very driven and ambitious, excel, and find opportunities to do well. But there are kids who need this extra support. And what we're forced to do is try to offer the baseline and allow other kids to fall through the cracks because we just don't have the resources to support them at the levels that they need. And we are, I think it's fair to say, we're in a district where a huge percentage of students are falling through the cracks. It's just, it's hard because I am one of the kids who did manage to make it through despite everything. But I also feel like I had to be extra hardworking and incredibly ambitious to get there, right? And I also had really good luck. And not everybody has that. I had two parents in my home always. I had a education outside of the US that was far beyond what I ever received when I was in public schools. So I was always ahead, always excelling. And I think if those things were taken away, I don't know that even I would have made it through, even everything else being equal. So I think my kids will be fine, whether I keep them in Hartford schools or not. But because I have resources to supplement, and I have supplemented, I get them reading tutors. I'm getting my kid enrolled in Mathnasium for extra math. They do summer camp, like they travel. But I can't, that's not every parent's reality. And I feel like when we tell ourselves that like people who want to do well will do well, we forget that there are kids who want to do well and who struggle, and we lack the resources to support them. That is also a reality. I think most people want to do well. Most kids want to do well, but if you get to school, you're hungry, or you have so much trouble at home, you can't focus in class, or you have undiagnosed mental health illness, but you don't have the support in school to help you get through that. Even a kid who wants to do well doesn't know how to communicate that. And then we don't have the resources to reach out to that kid and really support them. I think that is the harsh and true reality of where we are in Hartford Public Schools.
Thank you. Mrs. Strata Perez?
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Board Member Fortune, for sharing how you feel, because, similarly, I am a Hartford School graduate. I went to Weber High School. I went to Kennelly. I also came from a really poor working class background, but I had a family who was like, education is really important. And my grandmother spent money on an encyclopedia so we can have access to it when we were in Puerto Rico. And she would say, go read the old white men's stories, right? And whenever we had projects, right? But the truth is that, and then when I got here, I was one of those students who didn't make it into any of the magnet programs. And I was thankful that there was a public school that took me. And I am a product of Hartford. Like, I graduated from Hartford neighborhood schools. I went to college. I similarly became an executive director. And I know that that's a similar story to a lot of folks, but I agree at the same venue that there's me's, there's a lot of friends of mine who didn't make it or who made it to college, but now are unable to pay their student debt because they have to work it out like a low wage work because they can't even get a good paying job. So you have these cycles of poverty and you have these cycles of really what it is, which is we're having, I think what I want to say is that I want to echo the approach that we just named about having this is a side-by-side budget of this is what the budget needs to look like for us to have some semblance of a system that is nurturing these students and the things that we need to get done. And then there's the reality that we're dealt with. And I think it's going to be really important for us as a city to have that conversation. And it starts with us having that conversation with the administration, having that conversation with us having that conversation with city council. So that way it becomes a public conversation that parents can also engage in and students themselves can engage in, because we are being asked to make really hard decisions about the real basic needs of our students. I was one of those organizations that went into Hartford Public Schools and taught. And one of the things we knew was you could never go in to do a session without food because of the amount of food insecurity that there's in the system, right? And so I think it is part of our work as a board from some of the work that I've done reading the statutes is that we are part of our role is to advocate. And I think this is a very good example how we can say, this is what we need. This is what you're offering us to do. These are the cuts that we can manage and look at all of the laws and let's have that conversation as a city. And I know that the city, for example, just gave 3 million. And we can have that conversation about why are our students being asked to do with less as things get more expensive and as needs increase. And, I also want to take it back to part of why choice schools exist is because originally there was an understanding through institutional racism and economic oppression that Hartford Public School students were not receiving the same quality education that their suburban counterparts were doing. And what we've allowed to happen as a city and as a state is that now we are asked to pay for that inequity. The students themselves who experience the inequity, the district that they themselves, now they have to pay a lot of that out. And what ends up happening is that we have less and less resources for our public schools. And it creates the conversations that board member Fortune just talked about with parents, trying to make the best decisions that they can. So this is institutional racism. This is economic oppression one-on-one. Hartford is a city in one of the wealthiest places in the country. And we have a city that we have to be able to have a real conversation about our budgets in the city, as much as we're having a conversation about our budgets in the state level, because the state level has a lot to answer for to what they've put Harvard Public School students through. While also there's a narrative that public school students in Hartford are not good students, that there's something bad with us, that they're the language that they use to describe us, right? So I won't say any more, but what I will say is that I am a firm believer that if we can present something that is, this is what is required for us to give what we are by law required to do, a good quality education. And this is what we're forced to give you because of the choices we've made as a collective in terms of funding our education. And I think because then we can all, as administrators, as board members, as parents, understand the system better, and then name what are our needs collectively instead of having us pit against one another at the detriment of our young people. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that. And I don't see any more hands up, so I'll turn it back over to Dr. Torres Rodriguez.
Yeah, just for some next steps, we are going to have the conversations, right? Schools continue to plan based on the allocations already done, central office. Between now and the end of next week, those conversations will happen relative to not these reductions that are on this slide, but the ones already identified. So we'll be having those conversations, and we'll send an update to our community as to where we are with the budget right? The additional funding that came in from the city and the gap. A gap that still remains, and an opportunity for additional advocacy. We'll encourage community to advocate. Deputy Foster, do you have an update on the postcards? I know that we are done relative to specific, right, the funding at the state.
Yeah, we do have the postcard drafted. You know, and I think we're still finalizing the details. I think the idea is to distribute large numbers through the schools, to students, to families, and I think collect them back so that we can, I think what we're still working on is what's the sort of delivery, like how do we, you know, get the maximum kind of impact of the delivery of those postcards?
And I was talking about like next steps relative to the short next steps within the next week, because where we also have to be mindful of just letting people know the challenge that we're facing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mean, so not so much the postcards, like the letter we're thinking about sending?
But well, both. The letter, because I want to connect the letter to advocacy.
Yep.
Right, just one, informing community as to where we are relative to what we've mitigated,
Yep.
and the fact that we still have a gap. Encourage community to reach out to their local, state elected officials, and then the postcards. It's our way of engaging locally, schools, and having students and staff send postcards. We will collect the postcards once they're done, and then send them over to the governor, if you will, the legislature. But I'm trying to get back to April 15th is a vote. And so what I'm hearing is that we present what it would cost to operate Hartford Public Schools, right? An itemized estimate of the expenditures. By the 15th, I don't know that we will have an answer as to how to mitigate that gap. But we will have what we currently have, which is this is how much it costs to maintain a level. Remember, we started with keeping what we have, nothing extra. And even keeping what we have, right? There's already $16 million that we have solved for. So I just want to check in that I understand that while we'll continue to advocate, that we have a shared understanding that by the 15th, we might not have the answer.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Chair. I guess Superintendent, in response to what I was hearing, I think proposed cuts as itemized on this slide, I think needs to be somehow in the discussion or somewhere in that space in this regard, that I don't care what kind of budget we put forth, they're eventually going to come back to us with some sense of what would you recommend trimming? And no one's going to somehow cut it on our behalf. And so I think what I was hearing is this kind of very clear cut itemization so people can really, sometimes saying we need to cut 10% doesn't get the message home as saying, here's what actually gets ended. And I think having it this way is in a level where the community can engage it and see that, oh, we may lose our success center. Oh, we're going to lose our health clinics. I think that's what I thought was part of this discussion, because that makes it real. And even if we don't decide to do it, to have people understand that balancing the budget means these proposed cuts would likely need to be done. And this is the reality. If we get no other assistance, this is the reality. I somehow think that message needs to be somehow in the discussion.
Yes, and I anticipate people asking about the impact of these, and so knowing that there will be an addition, we'll add to this document what the impact has been, and what Hope Academy is, what it entails. Yes, I'll do that as well.
Estrada Perez?
Just one thing, I think that's smart, board member Walker, because I think they're gonna, I'm an organizer, so by trade, I'm a firm believer in the length that it takes to run a system, to change things, but also I'm understanding of the moments that are important, and sometimes things happen faster, sometimes things happen slower. So I think it will be important to have exactly sort of what you named, which is like, these are the cuts, these are the real cuts, and why, what are these things? Because I think it also serves as education overall, to not just us as board members, to our elected officials, to our families, that can really understand the system a little bit better, so that as we continue to have these conversations and these fights, because they're not going to stop here and they're not going to stop with this budget, we have a much more prepared board, prepared council folks, and prepared families to really understand what this means. So it puts us in a good place to continue. I mean, it's not a good place ever, but it puts us in a better place, because then we have a shared understanding of what's happening. So I just wanted to echo those are good ideas. Because I know the reality of, we're going to have to make some hard decisions.
May I add, I'm not able to raise my hand because I'm driving. May I add something about the communication that we send out to the community as we're looking to send more things out, I think is what I understand. So the previous letters that we sent for people to sign on to send, in terms of testimonies, I believe they were, the way that it was phrased with the pie chart, which is a great visual that shows the costs for special education versus all other students, while that is accurate and that is one of the things we're advocating for, I did hear from parents with children with special needs that they felt like they were being vilified. And it's almost as if like we were blaming special needs students for the budget crisis. And I had to check myself, because my reaction was first to actually defend the communication, because I understand the disproportionate cost for students with special needs versus students without special needs. But I had to put my shoes in those parents' positions and think, okay, you're thinking that we're attacking your child who needs more support, who's probably not even getting it, and we're blaming them for this failure, whereas it's more so that the whole system is not getting funded enough, including your own child with special needs, and we're trying to get more money for the entire system. So just something to keep in mind as we're identifying, sources that need more funding. I was surprised to hear that perspective. And frankly, I would not have thought of it with just the background knowledge that I have. But again, with the idea of not trying to pit subgroups against each other, just maybe multiple eyes, not that you're not doing this, but multiple eyes from multiple perspectives, reading these communications before they go out might be helpful, because, at least I can think of, a couple of parents who are really offended, and they do have kids with special needs.
Thank you for sharing that, Ms. Fortune. I will say that these were the type of conversations that emerged during the in-person community forum, where we actually did have parents, parents of students with special needs say, but I don't want your child or I don't want my child's needs to get in the way of your child's needs. So thank you. That is never the intent, and we will be more intentional with our language as to all students, including and naming the groups as well.
Mr. Tatum?
Yeah, that's a great point, Ms. Fortune. And like, I think one thing that's helpful is to sort of like keep in mind like where the power is in the situation. And it's like obviously not in the like students and families who have special needs and are needing these services. Like the power exists elsewhere, and we can direct our efforts towards that. Specifically, like several of us testified last week in the education committee, like there are bills on that are going to be brought to the legislature that could solve this problem. And our elected officials will be voting on those bills and amending those bills. Like they're the ones with the power here. we can communicate as best we can the reality, and ultimately we need to put pressure on them to do the right thing and do whatever it takes to, because there's a bunch of, like, as Krister said a moment ago, like there's a bunch of reasons why people might try to slow this down, and some of them may be better reasons than others, some of them are just terrible reasons, and unfortunately it takes a lot of, like, effort and pressure from a lot of people to help them do the right thing sometimes, but that's the work that is cut out for us, and keeping that in mind so that we're not having these sort of, like, intergroup you know finger pointing. Let's keep the bigger picture in mind, and keep that advocacy going.
Yeah, and along the same lines, like I keep reminding myself too, if we do face backlash as a board for this decision, it's I think instead of being defensive, which, like, it's our decision and we want to, like, defend ourselves. Yeah, maybe we agree with parents. Yes, I agree with you. These cuts were terrible. They were unfair. But this is the amount of money that we get, right? I just hate feeling like I'm stuck playing the game on these terms and there's not enough I can do to change it. It's just frustrating for me. Like, I mean, the other day my boss said, gosh, how did you get on a board of ed? It's so thankless. You couldn't get something easier to do? I think because he noticed my work hours have gone down, because, like, I can't work as much and try to do a decent job with, like, being on the board and trying to understand the things I have to decide on. But yeah, at the risk of rambling, it's just been hard. It's hard mentally. My husband used to be the treasurer of our church, which has a nice endowment, and we have a small church deficit, which is, still continues to be supplemented by the endowment from, old Hartford money that left these funds behind. And he used to lose sleep over this. And now I'm like, goodness gracious, you lost sleep over the church, not having a deficit of, I don't know, $100,000, and it's been supplemented from the endowment, and the endowment shrinking. Here we are with district with kids not being educated, going to school. I still remember the mother who came and said her son went to school, had no math teacher, no English teacher, no STEM teacher, and no science teacher for a sustained period of time. I'm still shell shocked about this. And it's really hard to not lose sleep over this and feel like now I'm just like a pawn on the board playing the game. And despite my efforts, just still not being able to do enough to make it better and change it. So that's been hard.
Mrs. Strada Perez, your hand is still up. Did you have another question?
Oh, yes. First I forgot to lower it, but then I realized I did have another question. I think in terms of the language the conversation we're using around special education, thank you for bringing that up, because I think what it is too is that because we don't live in a vacuum, there's a larger context happening where a lot of the national and, like, even across state lines, like national government, but also across state lines, conversation on the cost of special education, and often it gets placed, it almost is spoken as if, look at all this cost, and so people focus on the cost, and there's this talking point going around, and we're not doing that, right? But there are people having talking points around where they're basically saying it's the cost of special education, right, as a way to start chipping away at the rights that we know are being chipped away at, which includes disability rights. And so I think the clearer we can make the message is important, because this is the way in which they utilize real pain points to undermine what we're trying to say, which is essentially we need more support they deserve to have the education that they have. They deserve to have their needs met. And there's this cost to being able to do so. And they deserve to have that, just like every other student deserves to have what they need to, right? So I think the reason it's coming up is because there's a lot of chatter online, in person, in certain spaces, that are using that argument to chip away at the earned rights and protections for disabled students and disabled people at large, but particularly disabled students. So I just wanted to bring that context in as to why it's important to clarify what we mean, because we're definitely not doing that. But there are these folks who are anti-public education, anti the rights of disability folks and disability students, who are utilizing some of that the cost to then blame it on students to then chip away at our other rights.
I'm wondering briefly if it makes any sense to invite city council members or our delegation to send out personal invitations to those folks to our public hearing on Tuesday so that they can be in the audience and hear firsthand the conversations. I don't know where that should come from, but I'm just throwing that out as an idea that I've had since we've sat here tonight.
Yes, and I think we've invited them actually not to the hearing, but to the community forum. So that's good thinking. And I will also, whatever communication we send out to our community, we'll send it out to them as well. Just right so that they can have an update as to where we are with the budget. We present we do our presentation at the city 23rd, I think, 23rd April, right? Yes. But yes, we will certainly send an invite.
Being no other questions, comments? Oh, Mrs. Strata-Perez.
Sorry, I hate to do it again, but I just wanted to say that I echo the charge to invite, or I know that we're doing it. I just wanted to publicly echo it. I think it's really going to be important for elected officials, city council, and our state members of our state delegation to be present. And so if the board has to send a different, I don't know what channels, if the board has to send a different email to also to encourage that, or if it comes from the district, as you guys are already doing it. But I just wanted to echo that. I think that's a really important moment for them to be in community and to hear what's going on.
Thank you, everybody, for your thinking, your suggestions, your ideas, and also for your stories, for sharing your lived experience as well.
I echo that. Thank you, everyone, for this conversation. I think it's really, really helpful to hear everyone's, we all have different experiences and we're all living in different lives. So really appreciate what everyone brought tonight. And thank you, Superintendent and Caitlin and Paul, for your presentation tonight. I know it's been very difficult to get to this point and look forward to supporting however we can. So please do reach out and let us know how we can support in the next few weeks as we get through this.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, y'all. Good night.